Hello, fellow health warriors. I am so glad you joined me today on Eat, Drink, Live Longer. I'm your host, registered dietitian, Liz Weiss. Today's topic is chronic inflammation, how it impacts our health, and how to prevent it and reverse it through diet. Now, chronic inflammation, it's defined as a state of persistent activation of the immune system, and it plays a role in the development of many diseases. Diet is a big contributor to inflammation, but it can also reverse it. Now, we often hear a lot of talk about the anti-inflammatory diet, but what exactly does that mean? And how can you follow it for better health? Well, here to explain all things inflammation is Ginger Hultin. She is a nationally recognized registered dietitian and health writer. She's also a health warrior. She owns the Seattle-based virtual nutrition practices, Champagne Nutrition, and Seattle Cancer Nutritionists, where she helps clients solve complex health mysteries with an integrative approach. She specializes in vegetarian diets, oncology nutrition, supplements, and nutrigenomics. Let me define that for you. Nutrigenomics is defined as the scientific study of the interaction of nutrition and genes. Kind of cool, especially with regard to the prevention or treatment of disease. The kind of cool part, that was my ad lib. That's not how dictionary defines it. Okay, so Ginger currently serves as adjunct clinical faculty at the Bastyr Center for Natural Health. She teaches master's level nutrition students. Wow, that's kind of cool too. She's the author of the Eat to Beat Disease Cookbook and the Anti-Inflammatory Diet Meal Prep book, which is why I really wanted to have her on the show today to talk about inflammation and to give us lots of information. So before I bring Ginger onto the show and into the conversation, just a friendly reminder to head to lizshealthytable.com/podcast, where you will find the show notes from today's show packed with helpful information, important resources, and a recipe for sheet pan teriyaki tofu and veggies. I'm always looking for good new tofu recipes. I made it for dinner last night, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later podcast. So, Ginger, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I love talking about inflammation. I've got lots of information about inflammation for you today.
Say that 5 times fast. Information about inflammation. So before we get started, can you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, your latest book, Champagne Nutrition? I got to hear about that, but just give us a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, I'm out here in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. I'm from here forever. I have been a dietitian for a relatively long time now, over 10 years. I have a master's degree in nutrition, and I really have a passion for clinical nutrition, but also integrative. And so I combine those two things together. Let's see. I really love solving health mysteries. So I work with oncology, liver disease lately, people with metabolism mysteries. I've got some long COVID people. I've got autoimmune disease folks. So I just really love that complex health mysteries type work.
It's so interesting you say that, because every time I meet people, they hear you're a dietitian, you invariably get onto like a diet conversation. But I always tell people that I'm a dietitian, but I play a doctor on TV. And I feel like I'm a very good diagnostician. Sometimes it's low hanging fruit. The doctors are always looking at the big stuff. And I always feel like, and maybe you agree with me, that we're looking at like the simple things that might initially explain what's going on.
So many people just need a simple approach. And so I really get in there with the nitty gritty with nutrition, but also I do so much referring out. Like you said, we catch these things that other providers don't. So I'm like, hey, have you thought of this? Go talk to this specialist. Like, I think a therapist could be very helpful. So I really believe that we need to work as a team. And I really try to help my clients achieve that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's get right into it. I sort of defined inflammation at the top of the show, but can you define inflammation? We hear about chronic inflammation. We hear about acute inflammation. I'm not going to be able to say it at all today, but yeah. So define it for us.
I think one of the most confusing things is when we talk about inflammation, it's usually talked about in a negative way. Like, oh, you don't want inflammation. It's bad. But actually, inflammation is a very important part of being healthy. So I always use the example, if you cut your hand and it's red, hot, painful, irritated, swollen, that is an example of inflammation on the outside, acute inflammation. So it actually helps us heal. But what happens is, if you can imagine that pain, redness, irritation on the inside of your body going on for long periods of time unchecked, that is chronic inflammation, and that causes problems.
So what causes chronic inflammation, which in turn leads to what? Like what kinds of problems would it lead to if it goes unchecked?
Yeah, it's this cyclical problem. So having long-time chronic inflammation is tied to serious diseases like cancer, some cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune diseases. So it can really help speed the progress or development of those diseases, but then also having those diseases is inflammatory also. So it's this negative cycle. Also maybe you have inflammation, but you don't have a disease. You can still feel inflammation, tired, fatigued, in pain, like something's wrong. So it just really is hard on the body and just puts a lot of burden on feeling really poorly over time.
How do you know if you suffer from chronic inflammation? I mean, how do you know? I've done a show earlier in the year on type 2 diabetes. A lot of people walking around, they don't know they have type 2 diabetes. How do you know if you have chronic inflammation?
Yeah, there's sort of two pieces to this. One is a lot of people can feel it. A lot of people feel, like I mentioned, like fatigued, tired, swollen, puffy, irritated. Like there's this feeling that people come to me and say, I feel inflamed. And so I think that's very subjective, but I hear it all the time. And then the other way is you can actually get tested. There's several well-known markers of inflammation. So a lot of doctors don't test for it. Some do, but I often refer my patients out and say, hey, ask your doctor if they would test these things to see if we can find out, are you inflamed?
Give me an example. What is one or two of these tests?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite one is CRP, stands for C-reactive protein. It is a protein that is made in the liver and it circulates around the body. And when it's high, it tells us in the blood, oh, there's something going on here. The body is irritated.
So you like this CRP, C-reactive protein test?
Exactly.
Very cool. Okay. So you sort of just described chronic inflammation. We know diet can lead to it. Well, just tell us big picture, what can cause chronic inflammation? I know diet's one of those pieces. We're going to dig deeper into it. But what in our lives, our lifestyles can cause chronic inflammation?
A lot of things. And so I don't really like to only talk about the diet without talking about all these other things that can influence it. Because I tell people you can have the healthiest diet in the world, but you could still be totally inflamed if you smoke cigarettes or have smoke exposure. That's extremely inflammatory if you don't have physical activity. So a lack of physical activity can cause chronic inflammation. Lack of sleep can be a problem. Excess stress can be a problem. So all of these things work together to cause inflammatory issues for us.
And so if you do suffer from chronic inflammation, what's kind of happening inside the body? Like, why is it such a bad thing? You said before, if you have a cut, you hurt yourself, you want that acute inflammation to heal. The immune system's like, yes, I'm getting in there. Why is it bad to have like the immune system on this constant, what's the term I'm trying to come up with? Like it's on call, like it's almost like an army that's always at the ready or always kind of fighting. Like what's the problem when that happens?
Right. I mean, that's a good example with the immune system. If it's like constantly being revved or the body's constantly being stressed, it can start to malfunction. And so an autoimmune disease is when your own immune system is overactive and starts actually attacking your own body. So it turns against you. So that is linked to inflammatory process. Other than that, like if you have these inflammatory markers, you have high CRP or other markers of inflammation, it's putting your body on high alert. Even high cortisol levels, that's a fight or flight hormone, that just really causes, long-term stress on the body and causes all sorts of dysfunction.
So what kind of diet, what are some of those foods that can cause inflammation if we're eating them all the time? Are there certain foods that are sort of like no-nos? And then let's talk about foods that we should be eating.
Yeah, one thing that you said that was really important is if we eat them all the time. So I think there's a lot of fear around like, oh, if I eat this one food, I'm going to become inflamed. And it really doesn't work like that. It's much bigger picture over time, excess consumption. So that is the problem rather than just here or there. We need to take a big picture approach here.
So give me a list of some of those foods that if we're eating them constantly, that could lead to problems.
Yep. So it's high consumption of like excessive consumption of alcohol, for example. Added sugar is another one that's linked to inflammation. High amounts of foods high in saturated fat, trans fats, and just a consumption of highly processed foods in the diet in general. Those are some examples.
And when we say highly processed, I eat a lot of processed food. I eat cheese. I eat canned beans. I eat frozen broccoli. These foods are quote unquote processed. So give me some of the highly processed foods that you're talking about.
Yeah, actually, I don't even I'm using it now, but I should use the word ultra processed. And so you're right. I mean, I was eating canned tomatoes last night because they're an amazing, healthy processed food. But what happens is when you take a tomato and then you add a bunch of sugar and then you add a bunch of salt and then you put some trans fats in and then you make it shelf stable and it sits there for 12 years and then it has added sweeteners and stabilizers and colors and flavors, then it gets so far away from an actual tomato that it's ultra processed, and excessive consumption of those kind of foods is not good for your health.
So if we were to eat an anti-inflammatory diet, let's talk about some of those superstars. Like what would that diet look like? And what are some of those foods that we should be striving to eat regularly?
Yeah, there is a bunch of different categories. And I actually love, when talking about an anti-inflammatory diet, to focus on the foods we should eat more of. That's my favorite part of this. So we can talk about these different categories, but in a nutshell, fruits and veggies, nuts and seeds, plant-based proteins like beans, lentils, tofu, whole grains, and then the fun category like herbs, spices, tea, cocoa, that sort of thing.
I did a show on cocoa and chocolate recently, and we talked about the flavonols in cocoa, good for heart health, good for brain health, powerful stuff. So who would have thought, right? Cocoa is an important ingredient.
All the time. It's in the book all over the place.
So talk to us a little bit about your book, and then we'll get more specific with ingredients. But the Anti-Inflammatory Meal Prep Cookbook. Tell us about the book and the connection to meal prep.
A lot of people that have conditions that I designed this book for need things to be simple. So if you have an autoimmune condition, if you're very inflamed, you don't feel well, if you're on a cancer recovery journey, all of these things make people generally feel tired, overwhelmed, don't want to spend hours in the kitchen. And so this book takes the best of both worlds, anti-inflammatory diet with very simple batch cooking so that you have healthy foods all week and it's less stressful for you.
What are some of your best secrets for meal prep? Because you should see me, man. When I'm cooking, it's a last minute usually decision. I'm not the most organized person. I make a complete mess of the kitchen. And then my poor husband, I'm like, I cook, obviously he does the dishes. But that's just kind of how I roll. I'm not super organized. Like, do you have to be a really organized person to be a good meal prepper? Like, what are some of the fundamentals of being a good meal prepper?
I used to be exactly the same way. Like, that's always how I would just put things together. I mean, I think we're lucky as dietitians. We are very familiar with food and cooking and recipes, but a lot of people don't have that background. And so it does take a baseline of organization. Like, I help my clients always make a list, think about what you're going to have through the list. And so I really started to move into meal prepping a couple of years ago when the pandemic hit. I was only going grocery shopping once a week. I had to think about my entire week, what I was going to make. And so that really helped me write this book and move into this way of living. I still do it to this day.
So you write the list. What else? Give me some other tips and fundamentals for meal prep.
Yep. So I plan out my week. I look at the calendar and see what I'm going to do and how I can reuse ingredients. I make a list. And then one of my suggestions that has spanned for a couple of years is lean into grocery delivery or pickup. If you're short on time or you have a problem with being organized, that is an amazing tool to really get the things you need on hand.
For me, it's figuring out how to do all that. And I'm one of these people that wants to see, what I'm buying. I'm a problem child. But, that's kind of how I roll. So you've got these ingredients that you're encouraging people to consume. Let's maybe, what I want to do, actually, I want to dig into some ingredients, some foods, some food styles of eating that when I think of an anti-inflammatory diet, I think about. But I want you to set the record straight. So here we go. Let's clear up a few things. Okay. You talked about your list, right? And one thing you mentioned was grains, whole grains, right? Because you're going to get the fiber and all the good nutrients in whole grains. Yet we often hear that we should eat a gluten-free diet and a dairy-free diet. We often hear that gluten-free or gluten diets, diets with gluten and dairy are pro-inflammatory. So can you set the record straight? If you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, whether you have a disease or you want to prevent ever getting those conditions, is gluten okay? Is dairy okay?
Yeah, these are really important questions. And they really made me step outside of my own, beliefs or things that I heard around town to look at the research. So I think the challenge is with an anti-inflammatory diet, it's not like a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet that is it's very prescribed. It's like, this is what this diet is. The inflammatory diet is a little bit more up for opinion, which I don't love as an evidence-based practitioner. So when I was writing this book, I went straight to the human research, the recent human research, and looked at what the studies were showing. And the studies were showing over and over and over that unless you have celiac or a wheat allergy, gluten and whole grains are anti-inflammatory. And dairy was really interesting. The research was a little mixed here and there, but generally, especially low-fat dairy, it shows up again and again and again as anti-inflammatory. And so unless people have specific problems with those foods, I keep them in because they have a lot of nutritional benefit.
If you know you are sensitive to dairy, or you're sensitive, maybe you get a lot of congestion from dairy, or maybe you feel arthritic symptoms from gluten, you're sensitive, then take them out, replace them with something else, right?
That is true. And it's true for so many other foods. I mean, one thing that shows up over and over again in a lot of anti-inflammatory books is nightshades, which is like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, that category of foods. And I do have one client, of all my clients, I have one that says, oh my gosh, I eat tomatoes and my knuckles and my hands immediately swell and are red and irritated. I know I can't eat tomatoes. That is great. Don't eat tomatoes. Like I would not tell her to, because for her, they're pro-inflammatory. But the research so clearly shows that those foods for most people are anti-inflammatory. So anyone can react to any food. So you have to be in tune with your body. But generally in the research, that's just what I leaned on to write this book.
I'm going to ask another question about nightshades because, I live in Boston, and Tom Brady, even though he defected, he went to Tampa. He's got his meal plan and his diet, and, he doesn't eat nightshades. I believe. I mean, don't misquote me, but I'm pretty sure Tom Brady is not into nightshades. What exactly are nightshades, and why have they developed or gotten this reputation as a food that can cause like arthritis or inflammation?
Right. So it's this category of veggies that has a compound in it called solanine. Have you heard of that before?
Solanine. Okay.
Solanine. It's a compound in certain plants, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and a few others. And so there's a belief out there that solanine can be irritating to the joints and cause joint inflammation. But the research just is not clear on that. And I'm just not seeing good evidence to back that up. So of course, maybe some people are solanine sensitive, but generally those foods, tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants, and other veggies are high in fiber, vitamins, minerals, anti-inflammatory, antioxidants. So it's a huge miss to take them out if you're not reacting to them. And most people don't.
Right. So know your body when it comes to gluten, dairy, nightshades, for example. What about, because I know you use this in the book, coconut milk and coconut oil. We know coconut is high in saturated fat. Should we therefore be avoiding coconut oil, coconut milk?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, in the book in general, I would say it's definitely more towards heart healthy fats. So you don't see much saturated fat in the book, but coconut is a plant-based saturated fat. And so I'm more inclined to include it because coconut doesn't show up like red meat, for example, over and over and over to be pro-inflammatory. It's not quite the same. And so I use a little bit of coconut product here and there. It's not the base of the book. It's just in there like olive oil or like, nut butter. It's in the rotation. And so the book includes it, but it's not a major staple. It's just part of some recipes.
If you eat coconut oil, will it raise your cholesterol, or like what kind of saturated fat? You said it's from a plant. So will it have a different impact on your body as, say, saturated fat from an animal food?
It's actually in the same category. It's the same chemical structure. And so if you exceed your saturated fat intake from coconut oil, you can still get into problems with your cholesterol for sure. So it's not like quote unquote healthier because of the saturated fat aspect. And in the book, I still talk about limiting saturated fat overall. A lot of people were doing this funny thing with coconut oil where they were like eating it and putting it in their coffee and putting it in their smoothies and just really, really eating it in excess. And that isn't going to help your health at all.
Okay, good to know. So limit it like you do any other saturated fat food. The other thing I want to talk about is herbs. Like you talk about herbs and spices. I always think about green leafy herbs like a vegetable, just to put it out there. If you're adding cilantro or basil or something, like last night when I made your tofu recipe, I added a little bit of cilantro on it. I had some fresh cilantro in the fridge. So, but one thing I'm curious about is turmeric, because it is a spice and we see it a lot in recipes, and we hear a lot about turmeric as being anti-inflammatory. It's kind of one of these superfoods that we hear about. So what's the deal with turmeric and inflammation?
Yeah, it shows up a lot in the book. There's turmeric, there's ginger, there's garlic, there's cinnamon. So all of these herbs and spices are potentially beneficial, but turmeric's very special. It's got this bright orange yellow color, and the active compound in it is called curcumin. And that might sound familiar because a lot of people will actually take curcumin supplements, but you can use turmeric, which contains curcumin, in the diet. And it's all throughout the book because it's shown to potentially help reduce inflammation in the body.
Wow. So give me a few other superstars then. So we've got turmeric, which I'm thinking of my brother-in-law. He lives in England, and we'll Zoom, as one does these days. And he will make these mega drinks with fresh turmeric and ginger and lemon juice. I'm not sure how this tastes, but he thinks it's like this curative, if he feels like he's getting a cold or something. And he had a friend actually who had COVID, and he said, you've got to do this. So is there anything to it, the ginger, the turmeric, the lemon juice, that can kind of rev us up, whether it's, make our immune system stronger or reduce inflammation, which of course, anytime you're sick, you want to reduce inflammation?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I mean, ginger shows up over and over and over in the book too. So does garlic. I think a lot of people are looking for these like really unusual secret superfoods, but actually some of the most potent beneficial foods are right in your pantry: the cinnamon, the ginger, the garlic. So those are in the book a lot, but I can't say that you can take a shot of these things and they will kill viruses or bacteria. I mean, yes, they do have those properties, but what you need to look at is the diet as a whole and think about every day. Are you meeting your vitamin C needs? Are you getting enough zinc? Are you getting enough antioxidants? That is what helps protect the body long term.
So in your book, then you've got recipes, and then you sort of break it down by weeks, and then you have recipes. So just tell us a little bit about the book and how you organize your recipes in the book.
Yeah, it is really unique, I think. The book starts out with a bunch of information about what inflammation is, the foods to eat, the foods to potentially avoid, hydration, lifestyle. So there's a lot of nutrition information in the beginning. Then it moves into how to meal prep, how to make a grocery list, the things that you need to have on hand, what kind of storage containers. So it really is like for a beginner, ground up, or if you're used to meal prepping, I think it also is helpful to look at the nitty-gritty details. So then there's actually 6 full meal prep weeks examples that you can use. And they start very simply. I've actually gotten some feedback that the beginning, like week 1 or 2, are too simple. Some people are like, this is boring. And I'm like, well, other people have told me those are my favorite weeks because they're the simplest. So I think it really depends on where you're at in the process. And then they get more and more advanced. Weeks 5 and 6, you're making the most recipes. They're more complex. So it builds on itself over time.
And then you've got additional recipes in the book. You've got marinades, you've got dressings, you have sauces. I feel like, I eat a lot of salmon, for example. I mean, how much salmon can you eat? It's all about what you're adding on top, on the side. What's some of the secret sauce, in the book? What are some of your favorite sauces or marinades or dressings?
Yeah. Oh, I have a whole chapter on that. And you're right. I have, there's tons of recipes in the book. It's like breakfast and desserts and lunches and dinners and, really a lot of different options. So you can keep making your own plans over time. But the sauces are fun because when you buy a sauce in the store, it's often an ultra processed food. tons of stabilizers, added sugar, added salt, and you're going to lose some of the nutritional benefit over time. So when you make your own, it's so fresh and really, really, you have so much control over it. So the basic vinaigrette on page 85, you can literally make that every week, put it in a mason jar and just use it always so you have a fresh vinaigrette. But to your point about the marinade, the dill marinade on page 87 is amazing on any fish and on tofu too.
I have some dill in my refrigerator, so perhaps I will have to check that out. Do you, before we talk about this sheet pan teriyaki tofu and vegetables recipe that I made last night, do you have like a favorite recipe in the book?
Oh man, I get so much good feedback on the lasagna roll-ups. People are really, really obsessed with them. I make them like maybe every other week. So you take like a whole lasagna noodle and like roll it onto itself. It's a vegetarian plant-based recipe with tons of veggies. So that's so fun and like a single serve and packs really well. It also freezes well. So perfect for meal prep.
So you're cooking the lasagna noodle first, obviously, then you stuff it and roll it up. What are you stuffing it with?
So I do low fat ricotta and tons of like, what do I do? Like mushrooms and spinach and garlic and onion, and then tomato sauce for those antioxidants and just, keep it plant-based. But this is designed to be flexible. If people want to add in meat, that's okay too. Like I want people to adapt this to suit their own needs and make changes at their own pace.
Do you think that or from your research, that the anti-inflammatory style of eating is mostly plant-based? Because I'm thinking about salmon, which I just mentioned, not a plant, obviously. So is it mostly plants or do you see it as having like a big seafood component? Eggs are also so healthy. Like how does it pan out in terms of plant forward, plant-based, which to me, plant-based doesn't mean vegan or vegetarian, but so I'm just curious about that.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, vegan and vegetarian diets show up in the research over and over to have lots of health benefits and to be anti-inflammatory. So that's for sure. But so does flexitarian, which means plant-based, which could include, fish and chicken. And so does the Mediterranean diet. It's a plant-based diet, but it includes some animal food. So the approach I take is definitely plant-based because most of us certainly need to eat more plants. But it has a flexible aspect that I think it makes it really approachable.
So this show's all about like what to eat, what to drink to live longer. If you were to eat an anti-inflammatory style of a diet, will you live longer? Like, I know you can't really answer that, but is it something that when you're looking at, longevity, living longer, living better, you see this as like, wow, this is a great kind of a diet to follow?
Well, I'd say for sure, because on this diet, conceivably, it's helping you, first of all, feel better. So certainly the living better aspect. But if it's helping you combat some of these chronic diseases, I think there's a good argument that it could help you live longer for sure.
Now, I know you just had a big birthday. I had reached out to you and you were on vacation, I believe, in Scotland. Can you share with us your big birthday news? Not as big as my birthdays.
I did. I entered a new decade. I turned 40 in February, which is really wild. And I'm just like wrapping my head around it in a super joyful way. I did my first trip since the pandemic. We were hiking in Scotland in like the snow and sleet and mud. It was really awesome. And yeah, just wanted an adventure and start the new decade off right.
So you're going to make any changes to your life now that you're in a new decade? Any lifestyle changes?
Man, that's such a good question. I don't know. I think one thing I've been interested in over time is the role of stress in my life and stress management and what that looks like, and also sleep. So I think for me, I'm really committed to eating a healthy plant-based diet. I love fitness. It's a huge part of my life, but there's always something, right? So like, how do I focus on sleep? How do I harness stress for good and not evil? So those are the things that I think I'm thinking about in the new decade.
Yeah, because like you said earlier, stress, lack of sleep. I mean, we could do shows. I probably should do shows on those very topics. And, for me, as far as stress goes, I almost thrive on it a little bit, but then I implode. My husband's like, oh my gosh, are you entering? Like, should I stay away? Are you going to melt down? Should I stay away from you? I'm like, yes, leave the room now because I'm losing it. Like I just get to this point, right? And so my decade, as my listeners may know, is, 61. And I was telling Ginger before we started the interview today that Tim and I went and got coffee and some breakfast the other day at a coffee shop. And the total price came to the lady says $19.60. Tim takes out the credit card, $19.60. I say, and I have a mask on when I say to this lady, oh, the cashier, oh, that's my birthday year, 1960. She goes, no way. Oh my gosh, you were born in 1960. You do not, no, you don't look like you were born in 1960. I can't believe it. And of course I was like, I look young. This is great. And then I say, yes, 1960. I'm 61 years old. She says, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said 1916. And I'm just like, what? I'm doing the math now. Like 1916, I'd be well over 100. I'd be dead. Are you kidding me? Well, maybe I would be. So the compliment went, right out the window. How do you think I would be like 107 or whatever years old? Isn't that silly?
I hope we're friends when you're 107. I think you're going to make it.
Oh gosh, please, please. I hope I make it. I mean, my challenge is exercise. I'm not a natural born exerciser. So it's like the struggle is real for me. I have to really force myself. And so I can empathize with people who struggle to eat a healthy diet because that's easy for me, but the exercise piece is hard. So as far as eating that healthy diet, that anti-inflammatory diet, like for somebody who might struggle because they love their sweets and they love their sandwiches, their Dagwood sandwich every day with, piled high with the cheese and the luncheon meats and all, like I'm thinking of my son, Josh, he could use a little work because he's all Mr. Convenience. He won't cook at home. So what are some entrees for people who just want to embark on this journey of eating a healthier anti-inflammatory diet?
What I would do for somebody in that situation is to choose foods that are familiar. So like if you love pizza, it's one of my favorite foods. How can we make a pizza a little bit healthier? Do like tons of red sauce and add veggies and maybe subtract a little bit of the cheese or add pesto for flavor, make it whole grain versus, white crust. Get creative in that way. I have comfort foods in here. I have a really great bean burger. I have that lasagna. So it's like familiar foods that you enjoy, but in a different way.
Why is tofu on your list of anti-inflammatory foods? Because sometimes people really poo-poo soy. Tofu is a soy product made out of soybeans. So where does tofu fit in? And then we can talk about that recipe that I teased at the top of the show.
Yeah, so there's tofu tempeh, which is fermented soybeans in a cube that's much more firm than tofu. And then there's edamame also, which is soybeans. All of those things are in the book. And when you look at the research, it is so clear that unprocessed soy foods, the tofu, the tempeh, the edamame, even the soy milks of the world, really, really anti-inflammatory, good sources of calcium, other minerals, vitamins, and very unique antioxidants that show so many health benefits. So yeah, I have lots of soy in here. And I think we need to myth bust soy a little bit and debunk some of the damage that's been done around that food out there.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest confusion for people is soy. And I could do a whole show on that as well. See, so many topics here we can dig into. I like tofu. I feel like it's, it picks up the flavors of what you're cooking with it. It's versatile. So this recipe that I made last night, I got tofu. I got the extra firm that you called for in the recipe. And I drained it. I wrapped it up in a cheesecloth kind of towel. And then I pressed it dry. And then I cut it into these little cubes, tossed with some olive oil. I tend to be very generous on the olive oil, full disclosure. And then you called for, it's a sheet pan recipe. So you place the tofu on a sheet pan, and then next to it, you've got carrots that are sliced. I only had one carrot in my fridge, but I had a bag from Trader Joe's of the multicolored cauliflower because you call for cauliflower. So pretty. The purple, the green, the white cauliflower florets. Toss those with olive oil and then put them on a sheet pan and just popped them in the oven, half an hour. And it was so yummy. And then I made a sauce, a teriyaki sauce to go with it. Can you tell everybody what's in that sauce?
Yeah, I have it here. It's the simple ginger teriyaki sauce. And so there you again see that ginger coming in, because when you buy a sauce in the store, it is so often full of, tons of added sugars, and it's really heavy and it's got all these, flavors and stabilizers. But this one just has tamari, which is like soy sauce. It's got a little bit of honey, rice vinegar, but then it's got like your garlic and grated ginger, and then just a little bit of sriracha if you like the spicy.
Yeah, that was super good. But I walked away. I was letting it kind of bubble on the stove. Then I was going to add the cornstarch and water just to thicken it a little bit. And I made a mistake of walking away, as one does. And I'm like, gosh, my kitchen smells so good. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I am burning this thing. Go running back in the kitchen. I salvaged it. I ended up adding a little more water because I had lost a lot of the liquid at that point. And then there's my poor husband scrub. I'm like, get the Brillo, scrubbing the pot. That's what we do. So I drizzled it over. Now this recipe called for brown rice, which I normally keep from Trader Joe's. I'm a big fan. I can walk to it from my house. A bag of I have the frozen rice, brown rice. And I feel like cooking whole grains can take time. So any shortcut, I'm all for it. My husband was obsessing on potatoes last night because we have an air fryer now. So I roasted up some little cubed new potatoes. And I had that, which to me was a little weird to have that on the side, but that's what he wanted. So I was like, whatever, we'll do it. So I drizzled the sauce over the tofu and the veggies. And I feel like that, like the tofu veggie thing, like you could change up the veggies. I actually bought a red bell pepper I was going to add. I decided not to, but so many different veggies you can add to that, right? It's just one idea is carrots and cauliflower. It doesn't mean that's all you can do.
I mean, the limits is just there's endless options. And so that's one thing you can do in the book. If you find a recipe that you enjoy, you can adapt it by just adding anything else in or, weaving in new ideas each week so that you don't get bored. But the benefit of this is if you were making rice, you can put it on the stove, put a lid on it, it cooks, stick the sheet pan in the oven, and you can walk away. Don't walk away from your sauce, but you can just walk away from the rest of it. And you have a half hour to yourself to do other things or meal prep other foods. So while you're making dinner for that night, you can make lunch for tomorrow or dinner for the next night, stick it in the freezer. So they're very simple recipes that are pretty hands-off for the most part.
I know a lot of meal preppers will do so on a Sunday. They might devote like an entire afternoon or even the whole day to just prepping everything for the week. Is that something you recommend?
Yeah, the book is actually written that way. Some people it works so well for, but I have a lot of clients that say, that's not really me. I'm going to just do a breakfast for the week, or I'm just going to prep for the first 2 or 3 days of the week and then, figure the rest out. So it can be, you can do it just a little bit, or you can do the whole week. There's different options.
You have a recipe in the book for these flourless banana, grain-free banana pancakes that looked so good to me. Every time I'm on TikTok, that's one of my new little obsessions. Every time I'm on TikTok, I see like somebody's doing something with a mashed banana, some recipe, and it gets a ton of views. People love anything with a mashed banana. What are those pancakes? Tell everybody.
They're really, really good. I mean, I try to do a little bit of something for everyone in here. And some people do want to have less grain. And so there's some grain light recipes. So this really is just, it's amazing what you can do with a little banana, a little bit of egg, and some herbs and spices like, vanilla or cinnamon. So they're just a couple ingredients, and you'd be surprised how well banana actually cooks on the stove. Those are fun pancakes because you don't need any added sweetener. Like the banana is sweet itself. You'll also see banana in here in smoothies, but also in some cookies in the back too, that are just like literally mostly banana. And they just bake so well. It's pretty incredible.
Now, you're in Seattle. And when I think of Seattle, I think of salmon. Of course, I keep mentioning salmon because I love it so much. I tend to get farm-raised salmon. I don't like wild salmon. I don't like the flavor as much. I find it's not as moist as the farm-raised. From an anti-inflammatory point of view, am I okay going with the farm-raised salmon? What's your position on it? Because if the whole world ate wild salmon, we wouldn't have enough, that's for sure. So where do you stand? Going back to my questions before on soy and gluten and dairy, where do you stand on salmon?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because salmon, farm-raised salmon and other seafood got really negative feedback and this reputation.
Bad press, exposés, all that. Yeah.
And there was some problems with it when it first started, but gosh, aquaculture has come so far. And right now, I think it's some of the highest quality product out there available. And you're also right. Like we have to feed our orcas. We have to have salmon in the wild. We can't, overfishing is a really big problem, and we need to look at aquaculture in new ways. So there's actually a lot of farmed mussels and clams and oysters out here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's a big part of the aquaculture here. And then some of the best farmed salmon is going up in BC, out of British Columbia. So really close to me.
And why is salmon so good for us? What is it about those? I'm going to do a whole show on salmon, I think. But in a nutshell, why would salmon, omega-3s, be so anti-inflammatory?
Most people just don't get enough omega-3s. I mean, omega-3s are really only in the diet in fish like salmon or halibut, trout, sardines, anchovies, mackerel. And most people don't eat like a lot of that. And then also in plant foods like chia, flax, hemp, or walnuts. And again, that's not a big part of a typical diet, I would say. So most people are just walking around not getting enough omega-3s. Omega-3s help calm inflammation in the body. So we do need better sources of it regularly.
Would you advocate a supplement of any sort?
I do. In my practice, I take each person as an individual, look at their diet, their goals, their health, their other supplements, their medication, and then together we, consider if they need testing, and then we do targeted supplementation. Vitamin D is really common, calcium is really common, sometimes an anti-inflammatory like turmeric or fish oil.
Good to know. Somebody just sent me a bunch of fish oil supplements. I have a problem with that because they're so big. The pill is so big. I just can't do it. So I'm like, okay, I'll just keep eating the salmon. All good with the salmon. So any other recipes in the book that you think for people who just want to start out, make that leap from their typical SAD diet, which I call the standard American diet, to one that is more abundant, with fruits, veggies, whole grains, salmon, etc. Like any other recipes that you would say is like a good entree into that whole world?
Yeah, I have my book right here. The really fun thing is the way that I wrote this book is I just put the foods that I make all the time into this book. So I'm really familiar. These are foods that I eat all the time that I really enjoy. And a lot of them, like I said, are based on very familiar foods. So like the vegetable fried cauliflower rice on page 74. Cauliflower rice is so well. You could also blend it with brown rice, so it's half rice and half cauli. And then it has tons of other really vibrant savory flavors and lots of other veggies. It meal preps so well. So like that's a really good comfort food introduction for people trying to get their feet wet with this.
And I noticed on Amazon when I was looking at your book that you have something like 1,300 reviews. I mean, you have a lot of reviews on Amazon. What do you think it was that struck a chord with people? Most people would dream to have like 5 reviews, And so what is it that resonates with people that they're so wowed by your book? I mean, obviously the recipes I will say are fantastic because I want to make everything in there. But what are you hearing from people who are using the book?
It's been such a gift. Like I wasn't expecting people to be this passionate about the book. I was always hoping that it would help people, but you're right. Like thousands of people are so passionate about it. I get messages all the time, direct messages like on Facebook or Instagram. People tell me things like, my cholesterol dropped 50 points since my last blood draw, or I wasn't trying to lose weight necessarily, but I happened to lose 10 pounds when I did this meal prep, or I have so much more energy. I feel so much better. I'm telling my doctor that I did this and I really helped myself. So the stories that I hear about realistic changes that people have seen in their health because of the book, that's been the biggest gift. So I think it literally helps people feel better.
So if you have heart disease, like high cholesterol, or you have, you're dealing with a cancer diagnosis, or you have type 2 diabetes, can eating an anti-inflammatory diet actually reverse those?
I mean, that's what I'm hearing from people, like I've seen people drop their cholesterol massively from eating this way. And I think it's a combination of eating an anti-inflammatory diet, but then also getting organized and making eating this way easier. So I think the meal prep aspect is very attractive. People have told me that their blood sugar levels have come down significantly. So I think you can really move the needle on some of these health markers by eating in this way.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to say before I let you back to your fun life there in Seattle?
It is a sunny day here today. I think the bottom line is when you're looking at an anti-inflammatory diet, definitely go to one that is evidence-based. There's a lot of anti-inflammatory diets out there, books that have been written about it, that are very opinion-based, that cut out soy or cut out nightshades or are grain-free. But that's not what the human research shows is beneficial. So in the back of my book, if you ever have questions about where did she get her research, or, why is she saying this? In the back of the book, I have all my research so you can see the date and the study that I was looking at, because that's really what I use to inform this book.
Fantastic. And I appreciate that too, that you're leaning into the science and you're not telling people to get rid of their favorite foods, because that's a downer. We don't being, sad and, being a pessimist, that's bad for longevity. We know that. So keeping it positive for people. I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Ginger, so much. I'm so happy I have the book, and I will be cooking more recipes, and I will share them on social media and tag you when I do. And speaking of, where can people find you online and on social?
Yeah, definitely connect with me on champagnenutrition.com. That's my website. I have a blog there where I post similar recipes. I'm also at Champagne Nutrition on Instagram and Facebook, and Ginger Hultin RD on Twitter.
And why Champagne Nutrition, by the way? I should have asked you that in the very first question.
Well, it's exactly what you were just talking about. We can't be sad about what we eat. So champagne is fun and bubbly, and a lot of people really enjoy it. So Champagne Nutrition signifies including foods that you love in your diet and not being overly rigid or restrictive. It's like you can have it all if you have the right balance.
I love that. Quote of the day: you can have it all if you have the right balance. Well, Ginger, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And to all my listeners, head on over to lizshealthytable.com/podcast for the show notes from this episode, action-packed with great resources. I'll link out to Ginger. We'll give you that recipe for the tofu and veggies. And as always, thanks for listening to Eat, Drink, Live Longer.